5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Start. The idea that the only way to stop violence is through violence itself is a complex and controversial topic. At first glance, it may seem counterintuitive, since violence tends to breed more violence, perpetuating cycles of conflict and suffering. However, throughout history, there have been numerous instances where the use of force was considered necessary to halt aggression, oppression, or injustice. Understanding this concept requires a deep exploration of human nature, societal dynamics, and the realities of power and control. Violence is often a response to perceived threats, grievances, or inequalities. When individuals or groups feel marginalized, threatened, or attacked, they may resort to violent actions as a means of defending themselves or asserting their rights. In such situations, if aggression is met with passive tolerance, it may embolden the aggressor, leading to further harm and exploitation. From this perspective, some argue that responding to violence with violence can act as a deterrent, sending a clear message that aggression will not be tolerated or go unanswered. One important aspect to consider is that violence, when used as a response, is often framed as a form of justice or self-defense. For example, in cases where peaceful negotiations have failed or are ignored, force might be viewed as the last resort to restore order or protect vulnerable populations. In this light, violence becomes a tool for achieving peace or stability, albeit a temporary and costly one. This paradox that violence may be necessary to stop violence reflects the harsh realities of human conflicts where ideals often clash with practical necessities. The use of violence to stop violence raises questions about morality and ethics. While some justify it as a necessary evil, others warn against the dangers of legitimizing such actions. Violence, even when defensive, risks escalating conflicts, causing collateral damage, and perpetuating cycles of revenge. It can desensitize societies to brutality and undermine the rule of law. Thus, the choice to employ violence carries with it profound consequences that extend beyond the immediate context. Another angle is the role of power dynamics. Violence is frequently a manifestation of power struggles. When one group uses violence to impose its will, the opposing side may feel compelled to respond in kind to reclaim power or resist domination. This tit-for-tat can spiral into protracted conflicts. Yet, in some cases, a decisive use of force can break such cycles by overpowering aggressors and establishing a new order. This approach often depends on the scale, context, and legitimacy perceived by the parties involved and the broader community. History offers numerous examples where violence was instrumental in stopping ongoing violence. Revolutions, uprisings, or armed struggles have sometimes been the means through which oppressed populations ended systemic violence inflicted upon them. In such scenarios, non-violent methods were attempted but failed to produce change due to rigid power structures or the intransigence of those in control. When dialogue and peaceful protests are met with repression, violence can become the language through which justice is demanded and achieved. However, it is critical to recognize that violence used to stop violence is not a universal remedy and carries risks of its own. It requires careful judgment about when and how it is applied. Indiscriminate or excessive violence can undermine the very goals it seeks to accomplish. It can alienate supporters, provoke international condemnation, and cause long-term social fragmentation. Moreover, the aftermath of violent confrontations often demands comprehensive reconciliation efforts to prevent relapse into conflict. The concept also touches on the psychological and emotional dimensions of violence. Victims of aggression may feel that only by responding forcefully can they reclaim their dignity, security, and sense of agency. This psychological need for empowerment can drive individuals or communities toward violent resistance. On the other hand, perpetrators of violence may use their actions to instill fear and submission. In such an environment, the use of counter-violence becomes a way to balance the scales and assert control over one's fate. In contemporary society, debates around this idea often arise in discussions about law enforcement, national defense, and international interventions. Governments sometimes justify the use of force to stop violent threats to public safety or sovereignty. Police may resort to physical measures to quell riots or criminal acts. Armed forces might engage in military action to neutralize hostile forces or prevent atrocities. In all these cases, the principle behind their actions is that unchecked violence would cause greater harm than the measured use of force to stop it. Nonetheless, alternative approaches challenge the notion that violence is the only solution. Many advocates for nonviolent resistance, dialogue, and diplomacy as more sustainable ways to end violence. These methods emphasize understanding root causes, building trust, and addressing grievances through peaceful means. While they may take longer to bear fruit, nonviolent strategies can break cycles of retaliation and foster lasting peace. Yet, critics point out that such methods require willing partners and supportive environments, which are not always present in violent conflicts. The tension between violence and nonviolence as responses to violence reveals the complexity of human societies. It highlights the difficulty of balancing justice, security, and moral values in contexts where harm has already occurred. It also exposes the limitations of idealism when confronted with harsh realities. The question is not simply whether violence should be used to stop violence but how, when, and by whom. Moreover, the impact of violence used to stop violence can vary widely depending on cultural, political, and historical contexts. In some societies, it may lead to the restoration of peace and order, while in others, it could sow seeds of further discord. The effectiveness of violent resistance or intervention is often judged by the outcomes it produces, including stability, justice, and respect for human rights. Ultimately, any decision to use violence must be weighed carefully, considering both the short-term necessity and the long-term consequences. The goal should always be to move toward a state where violence becomes unnecessary, a world where conflicts are resolved through understanding, dialogue, and mutual respect rather than force. Stop.